Hello everyone, we are back at the Kunstquartier Bethanien for the last session of today that involves two sessions at once. So we will have first the lecture performance from Donatella Della Ratta, and then we will have a panel as part of it in which we will have a discussion on the discourse of generative AI, weaponized language, and political shadow campaign. So first, I am glad to introduce Donatella Della Ratta and her performance. The title of the performance is Ask Me for Those Unborn Promises That Might Seem Unlikely to Happen in the Natural. And this lecture performance examines speculative violence and brings us through the violence of the not yet realized. This is happening in the context of Donatella Della Ratta's research, Speculative Violence, Ethics, Aesthetic, and Power in the Age of AI-Generated Synthetic Realism. This research is granted by the Italian Council, and I'm also very happy to say that since May, Donatella is a research in residency at the Disruption Network Institute until November 2025. I also want to mention what is the Disruption Network Institute. This is our new hub for research and investigation on AI and warfare. And we conduct research with fellows, investigative journalists, whistleblowers, artists, that in the last rounds of the fellowships have produced very important papers on the discourse of AI and warfare. And you can download these papers from our website of the Disruption Network Institute. Then this year we will start with new fellowships, and we have the topical day of the 11th of September, in which we will have new fellows going on for 1 year, and again, one whistleblower, one investigative journalist, and one artist working on the discourse on AI and warfare. And Donatella is doing a residency at the Disruption Lab, and in her residency, she investigates the role of synthetic images that are generated by AI within contemporary dynamics of violence, also analyzing the ethical, political, and aesthetic implications. I also want to mention that tomorrow, after our workshop at 6, there will be a follow-up with Donatella Tatwerk. That is another venue that we have been doing a partnership with. And in this roundtable, Donatella will present her research with the topic AI framing the future, the visual script that makes violence feel inevitable. So I also tell everyone here to join at 6 at Tatwerk on Sunday, so we go more in depth into this discourse. And now I present Donatella carefully. Also very happy because with Donatella we have a long history of collaboration. We know each other since the 90s. We were at the same University of Sociology in Rome. So I'm very proud and happy to have her here today. And Donatella Della Ratta is a scholar, performer, and curator. She is Associate Professor of Communication at the John Cabot University in Rome and a former affiliate of the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. She is a former journalist and TV author for Italian public broadcaster Rai Television. From 2007 to 2013, she served as the Arab World Community Manager for the Creative Commons. She has curated several international art programs and is the co-founder and board member of Syria Untold and a member of the advisory board of the Cinema Futures Initiative at the Locarno International Film Festival. I also want to mention that here on the right we have the table of untold stories. that is the development of the Syrian Untold projects. They create the Untold Mag, is a very important publication that also speaks about oppression, the situation in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Syria. So I also want to tell you, please support them and get also the things that they are proposing today. And so I will leave now the stage to Donatella, and after her performance, we will immediately go into the rest of the panel, and I will then invite Tina Lee, the moderator, to introduce it. So thank you, and Donatella, welcome here.
But if you can learn to pray bold prayers and big prayers and expect big and believe big, that allows God to do big things in your life. And some of you have a dream deep down on the inside, but you've never asked God for it. You pray for everyone else, but you need to start asking God for what He's put in you. It's not wrong to ask. It's not selfish to ask. God expects us to ask. In fact, the Scripture says in Psalm 2, verse 8, "Ask of me, and I will give you the nations." God is saying, ask me for big things. Ask me for those hidden dreams that I've planted in your heart. Ask me for those unborn promises that in the natural don't look like it's ever going to happen.
In September 2022, 5 extraordinary passengers boarded American Airlines Flight 777, a journey unlike any other. 5 perfectly unblemished red heifers were flown from their hometown in Texas to Ben Gurion Airport in Israel. A cow is a bovine that has given birth. A heifer has not. A crucial distinction in this story. Even more essential is the fact that the 5 class passengers were fully reddish-brown, had no physical blemishes, and had never been yoked. Upon arrival, the heifers were transported to their new home, a metal shed in Shiloh, a small village in the West Bank, about 45 kilometers north of Jerusalem. Organized as a religious community settlement, Shiloh was built on Palestinian land in violation of international law. Just 4 years before the heifers' arrival in 2019, Benjamin Netanyahu had planted an olive tree there, marking it as a symbol of Israel's claim to the land, an act commemorated by a plaque that proudly accompanies our hold on the ground of our homeland. In biblical times, Shiloh was Israel's first capital. Today, it is at the center of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, now further complicated by the presence of the 5 red heifers. The red heifer, or Para Aduma, is mentioned in the Book of Numbers, the 4th of the 5 books of the Jewish Torah. Speak to the sons of Israel that they bring you an unblemished red heifer in which there is no defect and on which a yoke has never been mounted. For Byron Stinson, a Texas-based entrepreneur and self-proclaimed Judeo-Christian, these ancient verses hold profound significance. Stinson, who recalls his first divine encounter as a teenager, when God foretold this destined bond with the Jewish people, has since become a passionate advocate for the fulfillment of the prophecy. In numerous YouTube videos, he unpacks the red heifer's role in purification rituals. The animal's ashes mixed with spring water would be essential for cleansing those who have come into contact with the dead. Anyone who has lost a loved one or visited a cemetery an inevitable condition in a land of perpetual war. Stinson, an international fundraiser and advisor for Building Israel, a non-profit dedicated to bringing the Bible to life and actively bringing the redemption closer, he's the mastermind behind the Red Heifer's journey to the Holy Land. In a 2024 podcast, he appears smiling with the heifers roaming behind him. His t-shirt, featuring a large blue and white Israeli banner, unmistakably declares, "From the river to the sea, that's the flag you're gonna see." In another clip, Larry Bortranger, a farmer from northern Indiana, is seen tending to the heifers in their new Shiloh home. It's a lot of fun to be involved in something that I see God is doing behind the scenes. Ideas are becoming reality, he declares with satisfaction, feeding the animals while awaiting a group of tourists eager to bear witness to a prophecy in the making. The red heifer sacrifice is central to a deeply held belief: the construction of the third temple in Jerusalem. In Judaism, particularly within Orthodox traditions, the third temple is the most sacred place of worship, following Solomon's temple and the second temple, both of which were destroyed. For many believers, its reconstruction is seen as a precursor to, or a sign of, the arrival of the Messianic age. Without the heifers, the purification rituals necessary for building the third temple cannot take place. The red heifer sacrifice is the final sign, marking the moment when the long-awaited construction of the third temple can finally begin. And yet, there is a troubling detail: the location. For over 1,300 years, two of Islam's holiest sites, Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, have stood on the Temple Mount, the very ground where the third temple is meant to rise. For decades, this sacred space has been one of the most explosive flashpoints of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Rebuilding the temple would mean erasing what's already there, displacing, destroying these Islamic landmarks, central to the faith of millions of Muslims worldwide. Despite this, organizations like the Temple Institute, which actively campaigns for the Third Temple, present the project as a divine necessity rather than a political or religious provocation. Building the Holy Temple, a house of prayer for all nations, is the only peace plan that can and will succeed, the Institute boldly claims. Once considered a fringe movement, its vision has gained credibility as Israel's government and many other governments in the world shift farther to the far right. In 2018, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who was at the time a Fox News host, declared to the Times of Israel, "There is no reason why the miracle of the re-establishment of the temple on the Temple Mount is not possible." That very same year, Israel minted the Trump Temple coin to commemorate the president's official recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. What once seemed the red heifers in the statement claiming responsibility for the Al-Aqsa flood operation on October 7th, 2023. The occupiers' crime of 1,200 people in Israel and the kidnapping of around 250 Israeli hostages, sparking yet another catastrophic war, a genocide, on Gaza that has since claimed that has since claimed more than 56,000 Palestinian lives and still counting. The Red Heifers and the Third Temple resurfaced in Hamas statements in 2024, when the group's spokesperson, Abu Obeida, referenced them in a speech marking the first 100 days of Israel's wars on Gaza. He denounced the symbolism of the Heifers as a detestable religious myth, claiming it was designed for aggression against the feelings of an entire nation. And why would Hamas, in the first place, codename a military attack targeting southern Israel, Al-Aqsa flood, if not to defend Jerusalem? To many of us, this term meant very little and was largely ignored. But devout Muslims understood it to be a rallying cry, a call to flood Jerusalem. From their side, the Jewish believers understood it too. The war we are waging is a war for the Temple Mount, an Israeli mother of a fallen soldier has declared. Meanwhile, the Red Heifers graze peacefully in Shiloh, unaware that their fate has been written in ancient texts and modern war plans alike. For some, their sacrifice will mark the beginning of a new era, the rise of the Third Temple. As far as for what already occupies the sacred ground, the idea is to move them into a beautiful museum somewhere, preserving them as relics of the past, a sentiment that echoes hauntingly in other proposals, that Gaza population too should be relocated to some undefined place where their homeland is transformed into the new Riviera of the Middle East. I am no expert in heifers, biblical sacrifices, or prophecies of a returning Messiah. I do not follow debates on the rebuilding of temples or eschatological visions of Judeo-Christian movements. What I study are images. And it was through an image that I went down this rabbit hole. One day I came across a picture, completely by chance or maybe not. Maybe it was algorithmic design that placed it on my feed, retweeted by a friend of a friend of a friend. And then came another image, and then another and another. And before I knew it, I had spiraled down into a deluge of them. Dozens, hundreds. At first glance, they seemed harmless. So cheap in their digital polish, too crisp, too smooth, too obviously computer-generated. But their innocence was deceptive. These images weren't just picturing a world that did not exist. They were conjuring one. They were not documenting violence, but anticipating it, speculating on it, training the eye to accept a future that had not happened yet, but one that artificial intelligence was already making feel inevitable. Generative AI has painted the future in vivid strokes, shaping visions that until now had existed only in whispered prophecies and febrile imagination. In this algorithmic dreamscape, the red heifers have already been sacrificed, their ashes scattered in a ritual long foretold. The third temple is under construction, rising stone by stone, and Al-Aqsa is already burning. I have seen it. I have seen the flames flicker across my timeline, fueling elation, rage, despair. I bear witness to the digital chorus, voices rises in support, in condemnation, in grief. threads unraveling beneath AI-generated images, punctuated by emojis, a standing ovation, a bleeding heart, a cascade of tears. And then the watermelon, the quiet symbol of a nation, Palestine, whose very existence is put on trial in the comment section, debated by faceless users from across the planet in total disregard of what its population would want or need. AI has already carved out a place for them, too. This time, a future not conceived by anonymous users, but drafted at the highest levels of power. In May 2024, the Israeli Prime Minister's office released Gaza 2035, visually rendering the Riviera of the Middle East long before Trump's administration even spoke the words. The images gleam with promise. Sleek towers piercing a cobalt sky, crystal clear water flowing through green avenues, a utopia of consumption and technology. Shoppers move placidly through a world built for them, clad in the flowing whites of an aristocracy dressed in Gulf traditional clothes. This is no longer Palestine. This is a prolongment of Neom, the high-tech Saudi cognitive city stretching 170 kilometers from desert peaks to the Red Sea. A vision so seamless that is no longer feeling like a possibility, but rather inevitability. Like Neom, Gaza 2035, it's not a plan, it's a blueprint for erasure. A template for a new Middle East, one that unfolds not in the hands of history, but in the cold, silent logic of machines. And while the civilized world voices its outrage, condemning the crude reality of ethnic cleansing dressed up as waterfront properties, new jobs, and promises of peace and stability, we have already seen it. The future has already been rendered. The glossy AI-generated images, so polished, so harmless in their digital perfection, have already reworked the present. By looking at them, we have naturalized them. By visualizing them, we have in some way accepted them. What has not yet happened in the material world has already taken place in the realm of the seen by virtue of visualization. AI has done more than imagine. It has packaged a reality before us, like a foregone conclusion. What was once a mere idea now exists in photographic-like proof. A possible vision of the future that has already been accepted in the present in silence through our eyes. The optical unconscious, Walter Benjamin called it. Images that bypass rational thought, slipping into the depths of perception, half-seen, emotionally undigested, too problematic to be consciously acknowledged, and yet impossible to unsee. What has already been seen, however faintly, prepares the mind for its arrival. Generative AI is the perfect accomplice, rendering into shareable images the vision once too audacious to be dreamt, too dangerous to be spoken aloud. In the realm of the synthetic realism shaped by AI-generated visuals, every scenario, no matter how violent, can be rendered into existence. A geyser of new image worlds hisses up at points in our existence where we would least have thought them possible, Benjamin wrote. He saw in photography not just a tool of documentation, but a gateway to collective fantasy, a portal where the distortions of the psychotic and the dreamer could take visual form and be absorbed by the masses. a way of sculpting the unconscious of a society, its fears, its obsessions, its boldest and unspoken desires into tangible visions. Generative AI is the quintessential embodiment of the optical unconscious. Thanks to the generative AI, the red heifer's prophecy, the vision of the third temple, the destruction of Al-Aqsa no longer remain confined to whispers of the believers or the margins of esoteric forums. AI renders them and feeds them into the collective eye, turning what was once an obscure fantasy into a globally shared project. The violence it triggers is silent, unspoken, and nearly invisible. It is speculative violence, a violence that does not explode, does not bleed, does not scream, and yet seeps into the subconscious, preparing the mind for a future that has not yet arrived, but has already been seen. Benjamin thought that photography allowed the past to return and haunt the present. Generative AI reverses the process. The future now haunts the present. Image words which dwell into the smallest things, meaningful yet covert enough to find a hiding place in waking dreams. Now they no longer hide. They are rendered, shared, searched, circulated. Gaza 2035, the Third Temple, the Riviera of the Middle East. Speculative violence bypasses the censors of social media. It does not trigger alarm because it does not depict explicit horror. It presents the destruction before it happens, wrapped in high-definition serenity. But whose absence makes these spaces possible? The morning after I first read this text in public, a message wakes me up in bed. A friend tells me, the Riviera of the Middle East has gone viral. It has interrupted sleep, broken into breakfast bowls, cut through gym routines and makeup mirrors, disrupted evening scrolling routines, flooding millions of screens. A chorus rises. Disbelief, outrage, disgust. Words like inconceivable, shameful, grotesque spread around. Memes go viral. Some call the Riviera video an AI-made fantasy, Orientalist fantasy. Palms, dancers, and beaches cleansed from memory. And then the noise fades. I keep watching. I check the temple situation daily, refresh my feed to see if Al-Aqsa is still standing, defying gravity and prophecy alike. I follow the red heifers too. They're grazing, peaceful and unaware. And meanwhile, the president of the country gleans from tunnels underneath Al-Aqsa. He speaks of investment in tourism, but something much darker lingers in those old stones. Pesach video wishes in Israel solemnly announce next year in Jerusalem. Someone adds in the comment section, inshallah, God willing. The mosque is on pixelated fire again. I reach out to the author of The Third Temple, an Israeli novel once shelved under speculative fiction. He writes back, in 2015, when the book was published in Israel, some readers and critics saw it as science fiction, an imaginary dystopia. They could not believe that modern Israel, the startup nation, could ever transform into such an extreme and isolated kingdom. And Gaza starves to death. I am told that those who manage to survive there do so by signal. If you have a phone, if you can connect, if you can send digital crumbs, flour, rice, milk, through PayPal. Peter Thiel, the man who helped design the pipeline between hunger and survival and payment, this survival in code that controls Palestinian calories and lives, once wrote, "The destiny of the postmodern world will be either the timeless violence of runaway mimesis or the peace of kingdom of God." Thank you. Thank you. Thanks to The Void in Amsterdam who made this video also possible.
Thank you very much, Donatella. This was really an important journey to bring here at the Disruption Network Lab. And now we transition into the panel, Generative AI, Weaponized Language, and the Political Shadows Campaign. The panel will have Donatella Della Ratta, Míriam Juan-Torres, and Amber Macintyre, but I am going to introduce now the moderator, Tina Lee, that is the editor-in-chief of Unbiased The News. And Tina, you can already join me here while I read your bio. Christina Lee is the editor-in-chief of feminist cross-border newsroom Unbiased The New and end of the publication at hostwriter.org. In 2019, she was editor-in-chief of the book, here you are. In 2019, she was editor-in-chief of the book Unbiased The News, Why Diversity Matters for Journalism, a collaboration between Hostwriter and 40 international journalists published by Hostwriter and Corrective. She holds a JD in the US American law and an LLM in international law and has worked as NGO focusing on issues of migration and minority rights. In 2016, she co-founded the website Migration Voter to examine the role of migration in election. And I'm very happy to have you actually for many times here at the Disruption Network Lab. We always think that Tina Lee is one of the best moderators that we got here. So now I leave it to you to introduce the panel and the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you. I fear now that those images are also burned into our brain really strongly, and I think we're going to have a chance to talk about in the panel. In our panel, we will be talking about the discourses of violence and division that are being utilized by the consolidated international far right, and the technologies that are used to amplify these discourses and imagine new ways of enforcing violence and hierarchies against the people that they want to convince us don't belong because of their religion, their immigration status, their gender, or whatever the next division that they come up with and want to push. Florian Kramer mentioned before that Peter Thiel, quote, technology is an alternative to politics, and I think we all just saw that it can also be an alternative to reality and a way to imagine alternative new violent futures and to persuade other people to take the actions that are necessary to make those futures a reality. The next talks that we have are going to also explore the ways that discourse is itself a kind of technology in a world where algorithms can exponentially increase the reach of ideas that actually represent the views of a sometimes very tiny, unpopular minority. And if they had to use regular politics and regular persuasion tactics to convince people of them, they wouldn't have been able to. But because of the new ways that we have, the new technologies that are available to people, they have ways to get around that inconvenient fact. So in her talk, The Paradox of Authoritarian Populist Politics, Appropriating Democracy, Advancing Authoritarianism Through Othering, Míriam Juan-Torres will join us online to give a tour of some of the strategies authoritarians are using to leverage difference and othering to achieve their goals, including appropriating the language of democracy to remove it. Afterwards, Amber Macintyre will join us on the stage together with Della again, and she will give her talk, Far-Right Campaigns, Shadowy Networks, or Institutionalized Practices, which will help us understand the behind the scenes of organized influence campaigns, their key actors, and what it reveals about the data that we use and how it's being weaponized against us. So let me introduce our speakers. As I mentioned, online will join us Míriam Juan-Torres, who's the head of Research, Democracy, and Belonging at the UC Berkeley. Míriam Juan-Torres is a multidisciplinary researcher, writer, and public speaker with expertise on authoritarian populism, polarization, and human rights. She's the head of research at OBI's Democracy and Belonging Forum at UC Berkeley. And in the past, she worked as a senior researcher for More in Common, where she was the co-author of Hidden Tribes, a study of America's polarized landscape. And also the lead author of Britain's Choice, Common Ground and Division in 2020's Britain. Míriam's taught courses on human rights and international criminal law at the Autonomous University of Barcelona and is a board member of Fundipau, the Foundation for Peace in Catalonia, and co-chair of the board of the Belong Network in the UK. Amber Macintyre is the research lead at Tactical Tech, and is an investigator and trainer examining technology, activism, and politics. She's the project lead of Tactical Tech's Influence Industry Project, Tactical Tech being here in Berlin, and produces research and delivers capacity building to hold private firms and political parties to account. Amber's PhD at Royal Holloway University of London examined the use of personal data in civil society campaigns, comparing and contrasting practices of campaign analytics against surveillance. The research was drawn from her experience working with civil society campaigns, including her role as digital activism officer at Amnesty International. So we'll now hear from Míriam, and then afterwards we'll go on stage and listen to Amber's talk, and we'll all have a chance to also have some questions and discuss the interactions between these three researchers and what they're going to talk to us about today.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm being told that you can all hear me, so that's wonderful. I wish I could be there in person. It's really a pity that I cannot join you in the wonderful city of Berlin. But I'm really grateful that I've been able to listen in to some of the conversations that have already been taking place. I have a little confession to make. I am quite sick with a fever and tonsillitis, but I'm really excited to be here. So I'm going to do my best to do the presentation. I'm not sure I'll be able to stay for the whole panel or discussion, but hopefully I'll be able to push through. I'm sure I will. And yeah, thank you very much for listening in. So I'm going to present, as has already been introduced, about like a lot of the paradoxes that we see in the political approaches that are bringing a lot of the far-right movements to power nowadays. Not just bringing them to power, but also allowing them to muster a lot of popular support for their cause. But before I do that, I wanted to briefly introduce who we are. So the Othering and Belonging Institute is a think and do tank that's based at the University of California, Berkeley, that focuses on structural marginality. And more specifically, I work at a program called Democracy and Belonging Forum, which is both a network and a research hub that aims to connect and resource civic actors in Europe and North America. And part of the reason why I'm sharing it is because this is an open network, and I'm sure that many of you could actually benefit and meet people from across the US North America more generally, and Europe. So I just wanted to share in case you're all interested. And our focus is very much on othering and structural marginality, but also on belonging. So what is the opposite of this othering, this structural violence against groups based on their identity across a variety of axes? Like, how do we understand belonging, both from a subjective, but also a structural and systemic perspective? And what we can do to get there and to embed it in democracy. But as I mentioned, what we wanted to chat about as well, and or has been introduced, I wanted to focus a lot on like the strategic side of it, and hopefully it give us a few ideas and tools that will help us understand authoritarian populism today, and also what to do about it. And with a particular focus on narratives as well. So what we're saying in the literature in academia is that we're currently on the third wave of autocratisation. So we can think about the 1930s fascism, in the 1960s, how a lot of dictators got to power through coup d'etats, and then the current moment that we have right now, which is something that's a little bit different and something that I'm gonna be talking about. And I heard in one of the previous sessions how there was a little bit of talk in terms of whether it's this fascism, whether it's something else, whether it's white supremacy. I am of the opinion that when it comes to developing theoretical frameworks, it can actually be useful to use a variety of them. That reality is far more complex than what theory can capture. And also that in the current moment, there are a lot of things that we don't know yet. But it does seem that what we're moving towards, particularly in Europe and North America, but also in India, Brazil, and other places, is something that's a little bit of a mix. So a lot of the language that we're hearing is about competitive autocracy, right? Which is something that's a little bit of a mix. It's a model that Orban will probably calls illiberal democracy, weaponizing, adopting the language of democracy. So a model where there's a coexistence of meaningful democratic institutions, but at the same time, a lot of serious incumbent abuse, which tips the balance in their favor when it comes to electoral competition and much more. I would actually also challenge a little bit of something of what's been said earlier in terms of there not being a positive vision. I've read as well Asra Taylor's and Naomi Klein's work, as was mentioned earlier. But I don't think what we're seeing is just a restoration project. It's not just backlash. I do think there's a positive vision. It's just that a vision that's structured around othering and offering a positive future that contains a lot of violence, but only for a group of people. And these hybrid models as well always complain a degree of freedom, a room for plausible deniability that allows for authoritarian populists to convince many that there is a democracy that they are holding and voting for. But before I get into more the narrative side of it and the language and how several topics operate within this, I also wanted to help us think through how we look into this. And I think this was touched on a little bit as well, but I think we focus a lot on leaders, and I think that's very necessary, political figures, the most vocal voices. But also we need to recognize that there's a lot of flaws in having a hyper-personalistic analysis, because political parties and certain political leaders are oftentimes those that are identified as the best conduits for particular missions that movements would have, movements that can be across a variety of spaces or missions. There's intellectual organizations that are being set up, media organizations, social movement that create infrastructure, but we also need to separate those from like voters and subcultures. I know someone mentioned the manosphere, which is really fascinating and something we could touch on as well. But I do think we need to think through those different levels as well when we think about strategy and what kind of engagement we wanna or we can have in order to build something that's an alternative to what we're seeing. And the other thing that we would need to think about as well is that these movements, the authoritarian populists, the far right, are on the one hand incredibly transnational and well networked. And they are benefiting from infrastructure that has been set up, for example, by the anti-gender movement, but also incredibly intersectional. So there are movements that obviously would not use the language of intersectionality, but that always connect a variety of issues. So I captured this image a while back, but I thought it was interesting because it was a tweet by Viktor Orban already meant like connecting in just a few words anti-EU messaging, anti-migration, anti-gender, and a particular stance when it comes to war in Ukraine. But there's this constant use of language, one that's structured around violence and othering, and also around appropriating the language of democracy. Because much as it pains us, these people are not coming to power just through violence or through unfair elections. There may be some gerrymandering, there may be benefiting from unfair electoral models, but they are convincing a lot of people. There is some work of persuasion and this might be enhanced by the technologies that we are currently using, but there's also an affective and emotional component, and also a convincing that they are the true Democrats. So I don't know if it was mentioned before, but it's this idea of the mirror world, where if we hear the discourses that these political leaders have, and also the movements, we hear how they speak about like how they are the ones fighting for democracy, how they are the ones combating the woke totalizing ideology, how they are the ones that want to defend and expand freedom. For granted, it's always freedom for a few, not for everyone, but that's a key feature of the kind of rhetoric and narrative that these political actors are using. Narrative and rhetoric to achieve a change in a political order. There was something that probably we quite don't know yet. So the way that we think about it at the forum and that I want to share today is in terms of authoritarian populism, which is inspired by the work of Stuart Hall in the 1970s, but to think about it not in terms of only of like this is fascism, is this white supremacy. All of those are components that are features of a lot of these movements for sure. But if we think about strategies and political strategy and also cultural strategy as well, to think of it through this lens of authoritarian populism, a form of politics, I'm not referring to a regime time, within democratic systems that always is orchestrating this binary of us versus them, an exclusionary us, so providing belonging through othering, an other that is often defined by race, ethnicity, religion, or caste, always another portrayed as a threat, but then also through the lens of populism, the people versus the elite, the true people against a vaguely defined elite accused of prioritizing the interest of the other. And I think this is very key because that populism side of it is probably the one that's most appealing. And it taps into a lot of discontent that is valid and a product of probably neoliberal politics, of inequality, but also of the reality that a lot of our political systems keep perpetuating a lot of structural marginality, corruption, and so on. But through combining that us versus them and the populism side of it, they're managing to convince a lot of people that it makes sense to adopt certain extreme measures against that existential threat that the other poses, and creating ultimately permission structures for political violence. And that kind of intersection between the us versus them and the people versus the elites is the lens through which all reality is filtered, and one lens that is adopted. One that in reality doesn't have much in terms of substance and ideology. White supremacy is core to a lot of them. There's definitely nativism and anti-pluralism as core ideas. So that idea of domination and hierarchy, of fear, but also providing belonging, that sense of being part of an in-group through othering, but then not as much substance, which is also why lies are also so prevalent, but also almost acceptable because there's a lot of flexibility. And in this sense, I always appreciate the work of Robert Paxton, who's one of the foremost scholars on fascism, also showed how fascist movements and also had a lot of ideological flexibility as the key was to stay in power. But then when it comes to narrative, how does this operate? And I think that there are several aspects in which that us versus them, authoritarianism, certain topics, my apologies, and the populism operates that are quite interesting to look into. One of them is the idea of the corruption paradox. And if anybody's interested, I wrote a piece a while back on this. But it presents an opportunity to observe that appropriation of democracy discourse and the interplay of the populist narrative by these political actors. So it's interesting if we look at polls at voters that oftentimes voters that are most concerned with anti-corruption are actually willing or open or the most willing to vote for these far-right movements. What's paradoxical is that whether it's in Germany, the AfD, Vox in Spain, obviously Donald Trump in the United States, or if we think about the Freedom Party in Austria, a lot of their leaders have actually been convicted or being investigated for corruption. And of course, notoriously Marine Le Pen in France. However, we see that in this flexible and appropriation of our efforts to appropriate discourse, they even manage to rebrand themselves as like the true anti-establishment actors when they are convicted, because they can reinterpret the evidence as if this is proof that they are the ones that are posing a real threat to the deep state. So it's always that interplay with showing and branding themselves as the true Democrats and the ones standing up to power that's managed to also make them very compelling. Another area where they're deploying a lot of narratives, but in a different way than, for example, gender, as was mentioned earlier today, is in terms of migration. We know that when it comes to migration, even public opinion is actually like quite varies over time. And I think like one of the key things that we can think about here today is in terms of like who the most compelling meaning makers are. But when it comes to migration, far-right actors, those who use authoritarian populist politics, have managed to become amongst the most compelling actors. But their strategies have been not necessarily to be the only ones to actually be advancing their kind of discourse and extreme ideas, but actually one of trying to say, okay, what we want to do is to mainstream our discourse. So what we want is to shape the political agenda, to make migration more salient, frame the debate in our terms, and make sure that other political actors in the mainstream adopt our political framing and approach to migration. And we've seen that how that's been incredibly successful, particularly in Europe. The new pact, I think, is an embodiment of that. We also see it in the UK, for example, with the Conservative leader more recently making statements around the European Convention on Human Rights and abandoning it because of the needs that migration policy require. So it's been one particular approach to narrative, to connecting these issues to political strategy, and then also to connecting it to a particular view and reinterpretation of what democracy means. The other issue in which narratives on gender are, in which narratives on democracy are also weaponized is on gender. But this takes a bit of a different form than it happens in migration. So I'm just going to briefly introduce before I close up one project that we're working on called Engendering Authoritarianism, because of the key functions that weaponizing particularly narratives on gender, but also policies serves in order to engender authoritarianism, in order to build public support for these kind of politics and succeed, and for these movements to succeed electorally. And gender is weaponized in a variety of ways. Gender is weaponized, and the fight against so-called gender ideology is weaponized in order to normalize authoritarian ideas. So we can think, for example, of how some discourses around the natural, essentialist roles of men and women the hierarchical relationships, how some of these narratives are tested in the realm of gender, but then expanded to something broader as key pillars of what society should be, as an example of that. Gender, or so-called gender ideology, is also used in order to construct a threat to democracy. These feminists, the LGBT community, allies, as like we hear discourse in these movements as like totalitarians who try to impose ideas that are against common sense, against the democratic will. So like always using gender in order to build a self-image of the ones that are the true Democrats and the ones that hold the key to common sense. We also see how the opposition to gender is actually used to build a big tent coalition. And I think that also should make us think a lot in terms of what we can do in terms of opposition. Gender obviously is also used to both polarize and distract. And finally, and I think this was tapped on a little bit earlier on, gender is part of the opposition to so-called gender ideology has become a key aspect of what has been referred to as meta-politics. So to change culture as a preamble to changing politics as well. And that has been done in two particular ways. On the one hand, by creating a cultural and intellectual infrastructure, but on the other, to actually attract people into extremist ideas through gateway communities. And that can be the manosphere, it can be trad-wise, but also in physical spaces like mixed martial art studios and so on. Spaces that are generally either gendered or actually respond to gender anxieties. And this affects particularly young people and young men. So the idea is to draw people in and socialize them, socialize the public into an authoritarian project by deploying these cultural strategies. So it doesn't go directly to achieving policy gains. The goal is first to influence how people understand politics, identity, values, and society, and particularly create efforts or engage in efforts to redefine democracy and what that means. And that has taken a lot of forms. Part of it has been long-term narrative strategies. So if we think about gender ideology, as probably a lot of you know, is a concept that was created in the 1990s by the Vatican that's had huge ramifications over time. So just to provide an example from the United States, the Heritage Foundation, where the authors of Project 2025 as well, have been doing a lot of work on gender ideology as well. And then one of the first executive orders that President Trump signed was the Defending Women from Gender Ideology, Extremism, and Restoring Biological Truth. So we can see that knowledge, that language being constantly used, both the ideas of defending women, of being the ones that stand up against extremism, of restoring truth, and so on. So always engaging in that game of pretending that they are the defenders of democracy. This knowledge, understanding the strategies, I think has a lot of implications for those of us who want to build something different, who want to create a democracy that's rooted in belonging and not that violence and that othering against a variety of groups, but also against political opposition. So I'll just leave us with a few reflections in terms of what this means for us as well. I think on the one hand, it means that we do need to keep bridging and build big tent coalitions. A lot of the literature tells us that in order to oppose authoritarianism, we need to encourage defections from those that support a regime, which are sometimes referred to as the pillars of support. We need to have ecosystemic thinking as well. So think about who are the different actors, the role they play, and also be mindful about whether we polarize or depolarize. Make sure that there's a lot of grassroots organizing and be mindful of the gateway communities as well, how we engage with them, how we talk about them. So I'm thinking about the earlier conversation as well about like the manosphere and bodybuilding and so on. A piece that's incredibly important as well, and it connects to what I was mentioning in terms of narratives, is like how do we make meaning and who is making meaning? So creating islands of coherence, but also that meaning making. And then also having a positive vision, while at the same time being able to maintain calm and a sense of agency, because we also know that creating a sense that there's no point or despair is part of the authoritarian strategy. So I'm going to leave it here. I hope that was interesting, and yeah, I'm available if anything is needed. Thank you.
I think we can all agree that gave us a lot to think about and to add to what we've already been talking about. Thanks so much, Míriam, especially considering that you're not feeling well. If you are able to stick around and join us for the panel, then I'll make sure you get one of the first questions. But in the meantime, I'd like to invite Amber Macintyre to give us her presentation, and then we will, we need a clicker, I think, yeah. And then we'll have a chance to compare and contrast. I think there's a lot there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm really honored to be here, and yeah, I'm very excited to talk, but also to have the questions afterwards and start to share some ideas between us. So yeah, I'm Amber, and just to explain a little bit about my background again, just that I think is relevant for today's talk. I started my work in this space as a campaigner, but very quickly turned researcher as I decided and felt like we needed to interrogate the role of technology and become more critical of how we're using it within our own spaces and networks. That my first biggest project was looking at that kind of what's surveillance and what's analytics and where do we draw the line. But my most recent project that's just wrapping up is this influence industry project where we looked at election campaigns and the private companies that support election campaigns. And that's the basis of then where I'm going with this, but I want to also be upfront that this is me starting to put new ideas together based on that work. So I'm not entirely sure where it's going yet, and I'm hoping that this chat can help move us forward a little and move my ideas forward as well. But I'm going to start, as I started with this project, I'm going to start with a little bit from the influence industry project. So this is a short capture from that project.
The perfect strategy. Our experts will put you in the position to be victorious, electing a president. How do you build a movement? Your revolution starts here. New Sapiens. Engaging influencers, opinion formers and decision makers. Political advertising, political services, campaign analytics. Connecting votes and candidates. India's #1 elections technology company, 96% winning record. Larry Hogan, Governor of Maryland, we're ready to ignite your cause. Political campaigns, moving at the speed of politics to build your digital army and target key voters. Dare greatly, a champion for great candidates. Elections, create preference among voters. Where political change begins, start a campaign. Interesting happens where cultures clash. Every day's a campaign. Campaigns for ideas that matter. Peaceful change, driven by people empowered by technology. Changing the world, one pixel at a time. Digital organizing to impact change. Inspire change. Incite action. Behind every victory, there is a strategy.
So that's a little insight into the research I'd already done on some of the political campaigns that have been supported by these private companies. And these private companies it's all what I would call above board. It's all within an election campaign that we can see the public details of, that we can find in their kind of electoral transparency databases. But what I want to start looking at then, and what I'm going to talk about today, is actually how do these same firms work for what are more like shadowy campaigns, misinformation campaigns. And so I'm defining shadowy a little bit broadly here. Okay, sorry, hold that closer. I'm talking about not just far-right campaigns, but authoritarian campaigns, misinformation campaigns, disruptive campaigns. So it's quite a broad area. And I'm going to look at that in 3 ways, and I'm going to approach this in 3 ways. So the first one is to talk about shadowy campaigns that are supported by quite a shadowy industry. And but even though it's shadowy, it's still very like established. Like they have physical offices and they have funding from like state actors, but they also kind of come and go. So they're a little bit more shadowy. Then I'm going to talk about quite like institutionalized industry firms that have been working for decades and very public, and how they're running shadow campaigns. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about, or the last area I'll talk about is how the tech industry that we just saw is going to be moving further right as politics moves further right. So what skills are they taking with them? What data are they taking with them? And then I'll try and conclude with some idea of where my thoughts are going on this. So just a very quick definition on how I'm understanding shadowy campaigns. On the front end, this could be the messaging that we're seeing, like the language, the images, like we've already had some great display of what that kind of language and image could look like. But on the back end, we're talking about the types of companies involved, the money involved, who's responsible. And so I'm going to use, again, talking about this first area, where we've got shadowy campaigns run by quite a shadowy industry. I'm going to use a few different examples to show how this is working across the world. And so in the first example, on the front end, what we have in the content, on its face value is a series of posts and news articles that criticize Qatar and Turkey and describe how they support terrorist groups in Libya and Somalia, and also how they support the Muslim Brotherhood, and also critical of all of them. So it's very critical of all of those topics and countries. And then all the content was also very supportive of the Emirates and also of the Saudi government, and celebrating their successes. So this information was actually flagged by Facebook and by Meta and by X and in their internal process, where they removed hundreds of accounts related to all of that content, and they removed them due to what they call inauthentic behavior. And so what this means is that it linked to fake websites, fake accounts, fake profiles, often impersonating journalists, who would share kind of a mix of real and false information or biased information. And then they also, and as we'll see actually, then create accounts to not just post the information, but then to like it and engage with it. So it has like a false credit. It's got false information, false content, false like agents and the people doing it, false identities, and false credibility. So what Facebook and the Meta investigation and the X investigation also showed were that these campaigns were connected to quite a disparate set of companies. So these companies, there's no sense that they're connected to each other. .dev, Charles Communications, I mean, you can read them there. But there's no sense that there's no connections between these companies, but there's a sense that they might be connected. Like there's one called New Waves in Egypt and then one called NeWave. So like there's a sense they might know each other or be copying each other or be run by the same group. And there's no connection between them and that can be traced at this point between them and the money they're receiving from the state, but there's a sense that there was like aligned with government policies, so that the content's aligned. So we can start to make assumptions that they at least have a political motive, even if they're not politically funded. But all the campaigns also said the same things, even though they were coming from all these different companies. So then, my second examples are all going to come from Israeli firms. I'm going to talk about 3 different companies based in Israel. And I think these examples show not just that it's an industry, but also the longevity of this industry and like its history and how long it's been going. And so the first example is another of Meta's own investigations where they removed inauthentic behavior. And this time it was from accounts and pages being used to coordinate pro-Israel political content in a way that Meta defined as inappropriate for their policies. And according to Meta's own description, the content was primarily in English, targeting audiences in the US and Canada, where accounts posed as Jewish students, African Americans, concerned citizens, and posted comments supporting Israel's military and politics. Others posed as Muslims criticizing radical Islam in Canada. And similar content was also found across X and YouTube. And one of the firms, and not all the pages were connected to this firm, but one of the firms behind this was called Stoic, who are a political and marketing and business intelligence firm based in Tel Aviv. And their LinkedIn page just calls itself the most advanced campaign management system, which I think you will have seen from the video to start with. Kind of all the companies like to brand themselves like this. And they also use AI to create targeted, like in quotes, to create targeted content and organically distribute it quickly to the relevant platforms. This campaign also, what I think is interesting here is the Stoic and this campaign, it was also connected to, they'd clearly bought likes and engagement from a Vietnamese company. And so for me, this is also the start of seeing how an industry supports, and why I like using the word industry, because it supports itself, it thrives on its own. And yeah, going on to the next example, some of you might already know of Team Jorge, because it got a little bit more press coverage. This example comes from a different type of investigation rather than it being from Meta and X. This was from an undercover investigation where someone posed as a campaigner and or a political candidate, sorry, and then asked them, like, what services can you provide? And through that, learned that Team Jorge's, they're a group of contractors who've, as they claimed it, manipulated more than 30 elections around the world using hacking and disinformation. And they've also worked with corporate clients. And they offer campaign services, including software that can create fake websites and blogs. And they have a software called AIMS, which is a bot software which, according to them, controls thousands of fake social media profiles and email accounts. They also gather intelligence on the targeted opposition. They gather intelligence on people so that they can run smear campaigns, but they boasted that they could do this through hacking Gmail and Telegram accounts. Yeah, I'm going to miss over the quote for the sake of time there. There's a quote from Hanan, who runs it, who says, this is Spanish, Russia is about making a candidate, and they're going to make a fake candidate, and they're showing what they can do. This is Spanish Russian, and you see Asians and Muslims. Let's make a candidate together, he told the reporters, before setting on an image of a white woman. Sophia Wilde, I like the name, British, already has an email, date of birth, everything. So this is some of the findings from that research. And not only has this organization been running for a couple of decades, but the AIMS software, which controls all these accounts, has also been connected to other firms, which, again, I get the sense that there's a whole lot of firms kind of supporting each other's continuation in this space. And my final example of an Israeli company working in this space is Archimedes. Also discovered through an undercover investigation that found that they were running disinformation campaigns aimed at disrupting elections across the world. They are public, so their disinformation campaign service isn't public, but they're public. There's a website, and on the website they say they have social media skills with the ability to change reality. And equally, Archimedes are bold enough to put their own name on the ads they're buying. So they spent around $800,000 on ads on Facebook. And they also have ads that date back to 2012. So also, I think, for me, what I thought was notable when I was looking at this research is that they compare it to Russian tactics. And I think that a lot of the stuff I know about Russian tactics also started around 2014, and this company already dates back to 2012 and how long they've been running. So I think there's something about how long this industry's been going without us really interrogating it. Okay, so now I'm not going to talk about these quickly, but I just wanted to kind of give a sense that it's international. So in Brazil, Raposo Fernandes Associados supported, also had these inauthentic campaigns where they put out fake posts to support Bolsonaro. And these other companies that are listed support bulk SMS and bulk WhatsApp services that were used in the run-up to the riots that happened in Brazil. And then Victory Lab, again, in Mexico, they just boast that they can run these fake accounts, that they have loads of fake accounts that can boost your credibility. Another case in Indonesia, Insight ID are running campaigns which are supportive of the Indonesian government's position on West Papua. And in the Philippines, Twinmark has been supportive of the president there. So it's just all the same types of campaigns, but being shown in lots of different countries and lots of different companies running them. And so this was a set of like quite shadowy companies that pop up and disappear. Some of them have been running for longer, so I don't think we're kind of moving this direction a little bit. But now I want to talk about the institutional industry. And I'm aware, yeah, I'm checking my time there. So in this case, I'm going to talk about organizations, like the last group were kind of what also gets called black PR firms, like they're all a little bit unknown, whereas this is established organizations who are also a little bit more ideologically driven. So Harris Media are a renowned firm. They've been working in the UK, in the US, and Germany. In Germany, they worked for the AfD, and they also have received over $1 million just in a few years in the US for supporting campaigns. They also worked in 2017 on Kenyan elections for Kenyatta, and they were involved in, as it quotes, paying for advertisements for 2 mysterious anonymous sites to dominate Google searches for dozens of election-related terms. And so what they'd created was like a negative campaign against Raila, and it was a negative campaign website which, if anyone searched elections, would get pushed towards that. And it was all using quite divisive and, at times, false information. And I think I might have to check this one, but either in this case or in the case I'll talk about in a minute, they were also kicked out of the country then. Like the consultant couldn't go back because it was considered so inappropriate. Crosby Textor are like my passion project throughout all of my research. They've been involved in elections around the world, and they also work with gas and oil companies. And they have earned millions of pounds from the UK government. They worked for working on election campaigns. So just, again, very established. I saw them speak at a conference last year. They've worked across over 10 countries. And they've been involved with lots of well-known campaigns. But they also, through an undercover investigation, it was found that they have a professionalized online disinformation team. So they have a team dedicated to that. And it was said with such, they said that people working in that team would use initials rather than their full names, even in internal servers. And they would use personal email accounts to avoid their work being traced back to Crosby Textor. Another case, again, just showing, like honing in on this point, established firm Bell Pottinger. Actually, if you look at them up in the electoral database in the UK, they haven't this company hasn't made any money from elections, but the individuals have. They've worked as consultants, but they have donated to the Conservative Party, and I think there's also something strange about how many of these firms are donating to, so the influence firms are donating to the campaigns they then work for. They also worked in campaigns across the world, and again, similar to Harris Media, they ran a campaign in South Africa that was described as hateful and divisive, and they utilized race within a lot of their content. And similarly then were kicked out to this point of being declared like disruptive to the politics. So the final section is tech industry moving right. And so now I want to just give a couple of examples of industry that's already there, that's just waiting for politics to pick it up, for the far-right candidates to have more money to utilize. And so this is one of my favorite examples of there's a lot of data brokers out there that selling just voter data. And one of these cases is the Conservative Connector. And all they do is buy mailing lists from Republican and Conservative groups and then sell those mailing lists back to other Conservative and Republican groups. So all they do is like accumulate data and then sell it on. And so this is like a mass of data just waiting to be used by whatever campaign buys it next and whichever way the politics goes. Another type of firm is an analytics firm. They have they take that data and turn it into profiles. And in this case, I think it's a little, on the big screen it's readable, but they say that they can profile and sort of say what people opinion art on abortion, death penalty, gay marriage support, and this is what they're publicly putting on their website. So we can only also then imagine how many data points they could offer you if you were working with them privately. And also, again, as they go further right, how starting to think about like what kind of ways this information can be used. There's also campaigners, and people who are going to make the advertisements. Jamestown Associates specializes in those kind of like negative smear campaigns. Again, just like firms ready to be taken up by who's going to pay them next. And then I also just wanted to mention briefly security firms who, Crosby Textor, again, they have also, one of their units is just specializing in intelligence, which they then work with the CIA, and they work with intelligence and security firms, like they consult to them. And the same with these other two. BGR Group is a Republican lobbying group, work with security, they work with police forces, and the same with Orkash Labs, who've worked on elections in India, but also mostly work with police forces and security forces. Okay, so I think I have like a minute. Yeah, great. So my very quick reflections are, I think the main one I just want to draw out is that campaigners are campaigners, and I think that this really struck me. I went to this conference last year to to learn what the center-right campaigners are doing, and it just struck me so much how they speak the same as campaigners anywhere, and they just want to win. And I'm sure they want paid too, and there's a lot about, are they doing this for the money? But when they're talking to each other, it's like a game they're playing, and it's a game they're trying to win. And I think that this is something that then also takes me to this like moment of like resistance. Like, how do we challenge that within ourselves too? Like, what are we trying to win, and what game are we playing? And like, how do we make the rules for ourselves? So I'm just going to leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Amber. That was really interesting. I couldn't help but think that maybe all these guys just got put out of business because of the fact that Peter Thiel got all of the information from the US Social Security offices from Elon Musk, and it's like, it's going to be a great advantage for him in these situations. Anyways, now I'd like to have a little bit of a discussion and just talk about some of the ideas we've been doing. Unfortunately, Míriam had to leave because she is so ill, but we will definitely be considering what she taught us and what she was speaking about as we move on. And the first question I had basically for Donatella, I was thinking about what you said about how you use this language that they're conjuring, they're shaping, and they're manifesting reality. And I, for one, had been aware of these evangelical fundamentalist right-wing groups and their designs on Israel and their kind of obsessions with ancient biblical stories and apocalypse and things like that. But for me, seeing these images so stark made them seem more real, more scary, and it was also kind of evidence in a way. So even though on the one hand, I mean, you're suggesting that these things are making these realities more possible, isn't there also the flip side of it, that it provides the kind of galvanizing evidence that other groups might need to act against them and go, look, this is really real. They put it in black and white. They made pictures of it.
Yeah, so basically, yeah, the whole point about, my reflection on speculative violence is that generative AI serves the idea that you can visualize the future, producing a sort of photographic-like proof, as I say in the performance, basically making it real, We live in a culture that is extremely visual, so of course visuals play a big role in that. So I do think that actually, and this is the reason why I use the connection to Benjamin's idea of the optical unconscious, I do believe that this visualization actually makes, kind of paves the way in the brain also for in the unconscious, this is the word that Benjamin uses, to accept it. So it's actually a kind of visually prophetic tool or device that normalizes violence in this case. So if you're asking me whether the counterpart is actually counteracting because they see it more real now that is visualized, Well, I think this is a big question, and this is one of the issues that we are discussing here in this conference. Other people cannot, I mean, as far as I know, and I've been researching this topic for now a while, I couldn't see, I mean, any, so other people are not using generative AI as a way to counteract. I mean, also when I get the question whether Palestinians are doing it, well, of course not. Palestinians have real world issues, like that they have to eat and drink, and there is an issue in safety. And I'm not talking only about Gaza, I'm talking about the West Bank as well. So, I mean, these are the tools that I see being developed mostly and used by Israeli, Zionists, Judeo-Christians. And I also want to mention that in the performance I don't touch upon other groups, but of course I am aware and I am following also groups that are related to the Middle East, for example, Remigration Europe. And Remigration Europe is producing generative AI videos about migrants. So I think that this idea of speculative violence is not something only confined to the Middle East, but it's something that is taking over, of course, in the kind of far-right environment. So I didn't see any progressive, let's say, use of generative AI, but mostly, you know, used by far-right groups and illiberal groups. And also now in the context of Israel, Iran, like the latest news, I've been seeing now some AI-generated visuals that speculate about how Tehran will look like after it's destroyed by Israel.
Yeah, I've been seeing that too. Very nightmarish also to see the two militaries tweeting at each other and making these kind of threats. It's like, it's very surreal. You touched upon this thing that there's a kind of, I wouldn't say it's a privilege, but the people that are using AI maybe tendentially have more time on their hands, more internet access, maybe also more storage capacity, maybe also have some people that are working for them doing that. And that's maybe not going to be everybody's ability, right? And it brought me to mind of Amber's presentation because, you know, in times previous, there was this capacity, the fact that it was difficult for people to have a campaign all year round and every year because there were kind of monetary limitations on your ability to do that. And the idea also that campaigns could be defined to a certain period was also one of the premises of campaign finance law, right? Which exists in Europe and various other places too, that there's a defined period in which a campaign is taking place and the money that's being spent during that period needs to be tracked. But now it seems like what you're saying is that campaigns are constant, that they are ongoing, and also if you have a team of fake bots at your disposal, they're just always there. Maybe they're also tweeting about their breakfast or whatever too in the meantime, but they can always be kind of helping your campaign. Isn't that also incredibly expensive? And does that say something about who can afford to do these kinds of things?
Yeah, definitely. I actually, and also just confirming kind of what was being said there, I was really struck. I mean, this is researcher bias too. I was looking for like information about the political campaigns using this, but none of the political campaigns I found were like the small ones. Like they were all usually the ones connected to the current ruling government and the people who had the money. So I think that this was a particularly poignant thing that came out of who's using these firms and who has the money to use these firms and maybe also who the firms are aligned with. I think campaigns are becoming year-round and that's going to be more advantageous for the people who've got the money to run it. And it's actually also, because you brought up the finance laws, it's really hard to, it's already hard. It's been hard for a decade to kind of track how much money is being spent on a campaign on the digital part, because often what they have is like an internal staff member who does that all year round. And then, so when you kind of track what money, like what was spent during a campaign, in the 2 months before the election period, then it only shows you what they bought during that time or which firms they contracted during that time, but it doesn't show you which firm they contracted outside of that, and it doesn't show you who they've got in their team and in the staff. And I also, I think that was that interesting thing with Bell Pottinger, where the only thing that we found was that there was donations from Bell Pottinger to the Conservative Party, but everyone knows that one of the leads, the person who runs it, has consulted for the Conservative Party, but he doesn't come up in the database because he might also have consulted on a private level to just one candidate. So it's very hard to track.
I mean, that leads to kind of another point, which is that, you know, whether or not you're right-wing or not, that's kind of where the money is. So it creates also a kind of incentive structure that if you're one of the people that does these kind of groups, or that's part of one of these companies, that you kind of need to kind of adopt some right-wing beliefs in order to attract the right-wing money. In the same way, we also know that Twitter or X and Facebook have also kind of consolidated on the right too. So that also gives kind of free opportunities, like Elisa Weidel at the AfD getting this great opportunity to be interviewed by Elon Musk, which is like money that campaigns could possibly not buy. It would be so worthwhile. But it brings me to my next question for both of you, and then we'll open it up to the audience, about the question of how important it is or not whether people actually believe it, you know, the people that are doing these things. In the case that you're talking about with the heifers, there's also a tremendous amount of money being generated by this project, right? There's money being put into creating these AI things and creating this, but there's also people that are donating and a huge fundraiser. Similarly with yours, we see that there's a huge amount of money that comes in. Do the people that are behind it really believe what they're saying, or is it a way for them to get money? And if they do or don't, does it actually matter?
I think it doesn't matter if they do or don't, that's for sure. But when it comes also to this, as you said, I mean, the Third Temple movement was a movement that was a small one, a fringe movement that has been gaining traction because, of course, of the change of the political climate, not only in Israel, but worldwide. So now it relies a lot on big donations. It's becoming incredibly big. And this is the reason why these things are growing, and also Hamas is taking it seriously. So if Hamas took it seriously, and probably we are now speculating, but might be one of the reasons why October 7th was launched, then I think we should take it seriously too. And there is something else I wanted to add, because we have been talking a lot about Peter Thiel, also in the previous presentation, and I think it's a key figure, and I was also quoting him in my performance. But speaking of religion, I mean, Peter Thiel has an essay from 2007 called The Straussian Moment, which I invite you to read if you haven't, because it's very much telling about, I mean, basically he argues that one of the big failures of the Enlightenment and the modernity that sprout from the Enlightenment is to have removed the question of religion, the question of the aftermath, the question of believing into something that is supernatural. And I do think that to this extent he's right. So I think this is one of the problems that we are facing now as a progressive left, that we have kind of removed completely the question of religion, which is an important question, has been always an important question in the history of mankind. So I think it's time to actually not consider those who believe like just, you know, crazy people or extremists, but we should take them seriously, and we should rethink about the ways in which we think about religion.
Yeah, I think I also think like it doesn't matter in a way, like whether they believe it or not, because the impact of what's happening is happening. And the other side of me is like, well, it kind of does matter, because it's surreal that we live in a world where people who don't believe things are doing so much impact and having so much impact, and that this needs some interrogation. Like, if it's all made up, then what are we doing? And I think trying to understand also like then the motives and like what are the motives feels very important. And like I also am just I've always liked investigating these firms, because I think it's really interesting like what motivates someone to also really, I think there's not just believers in like the politics, but believers in the tech solutionism as well, like believers in the tech, believers in the method, believing that if you play this game everything works out. And so I think it's like maybe they don't believe in the politics, or maybe they're coming around to it, but they do believe something in their method, and they trust that that's, I mean, it's that classic thing, they have the privilege and it works out for them, so they trust that it should work out for everyone.
Yeah, I guess that's pretty disturbing, but I think to some degree, to me, it matters if it's sincere or not, because the way that we would persuade people against it, it matters if we're saying, like, you don't really believe this. Come on, let's get serious. You just get paid to. Or whether we're trying to convince them, no, actually, you shouldn't do this because you know. But let's open this up to the audience now. Do you guys have questions also with reflections as to Míriam's piece of this as well? I would love to hear any questions that you have for our esteemed speakers.
Yes, I think it's for Amber. I just wanted to know your personal journey during the research. It could be jarring to find out like elections are manipulated, etc. And also the logistics of these firms, like where do they post their vacancies and all of that, you know? So I'm very, very curious because we don't see it.
Looking for a job?
Maybe.
I really like the question because there's just been so many little moments within the journey that I would love to just like write those little bits out. I think a lot of it has been public, like a lot of it's findable, and I think that surprised me initially, like as soon as I knew a few names of companies, and so that was how it started. And it started just before the Cambridge Analytica scandal, so we had a list of names that included Cambridge Analytica, and maybe just 10 companies, and I started like looking them up. And actually when you said job posts, one of the places I would go is Glassdoor, because then you could find out about their culture and if there's any annoyed like people that maybe would want to talk to me. So I think that there's so many little routes into understanding them, but none of them are comprehensive on their own. So that's definitely the research journey has also been realizing that I always hit an end and then have to find a new method to get the next bit of information, because it's never comprehensive. And just also that personal journey, but I actually had a moment after looking at some of these inauthentic accounts, and then a friend posted something on Facebook yesterday, and I just immediately was like, oh, that's one of those fake websites. I know it is. Like, I can just tell now. I've seen so many. And that was very jarring. Like, that was like, oh, I don't know if I hadn't been noticing them before, and I'm noticing them now. So I think how much it's told me I have to be looking out for feels big. Like, it feels like, how do we integrate that into media literacy? Like, how do we get this out there? Yeah, thanks.
Okay, hi. Thank you so much for your presentations. I was wondering about how we can consider, with all the disinformation going on, and kind of there not really being a barrier anymore between disinformation and kind of lobbying, or there being a very smooth transition between the two subjects. I was kind of wondering in the sense of like how we actually have policies or systems in place to actually hold that accountable, because a lot of like news organizations are now, of course, doing like fact checks and everything, but often that comes kind of like after the fact and then only has like limited impact, because even though it's very good that it happens, but of course once information is out there, it often can't be put back into like the Pandora's box. And I was just reading through kind of the code of conduct of the German lobby register, for example, and it has kind of like all these values around like truthfulness and kind of like, also like right for information, this kind of things. But there isn't really anyone who's really checking if that actually takes place. So I think my general question is, okay, how do we deal with influence industries and disinformation in that space? And do you have any recommendations how to actually like practically go about that? I know it's a very big question, but I think one that we a lot of us are kind of thinking about. Thank you.
But if you have thoughts too, then I think for me there's I actually don't have an answer. So that's where I'm going to go with that. I feel completely like lost in loops when I start thinking about it. Like I think, okay, we need fact checkers, and I'm like, so now we need 2 types of organizations running, and that feels like, and then we're going to need fact checkers on fact checkers, or I don't know. It feels like we're ever increasing what we're adding things on, and I feel like it needs rethought. And I definitely haven't rethought it enough yet to work out what that solution is. But I don't think people have. I think we're kind of playing catch up all the time and adding things on all the time. And it's really hard to work out how do we create a policy that actually takes a step back and approaches it in a different way.
I mean, we also did try that, right? We had a lot of fact-checking organizations, but I mean, when you think about what Donatella was presenting, it's not that people think this is real, right?
No, but yeah, now I get you. So I don't think we can frame what I showed you in the performance as disinformation or misinformation. This is, as I said, as speculation. It's a visualization of a speculation, and people believe in it because they want to believe in it. You know, so it's not a matter of debunking. These images create words. You know, they are operational, to quote Aaron Farouki, a German artist and media theorist. So they actually have the function of word-making function. You know, it's not a matter of like whether they are real or they correspond to an empirical reality, because what they want to do is conjure up a word in the future that might have an effect, an impact in the action of the present. You know, so I wouldn't frame them as misinformation or fake information and disinformation.
Yeah, we've seen that a lot, actually, that they've moved from things that were like obviously fake news, fake websites, to just doing, you know, pictures of Donald Trump beating up the media, or this Gaza resort thing. No one thought this is real, but it conveys a message nevertheless, so it actually evades the concept of fact-checking at all. It's not the point, is that we present this as real.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want, there is this idea of hyperstition. I don't know if you ever heard about a hyperstition. In fact, it comes from accelerationism, so I mean, which was quoted also by Florian before. I do believe that these images should be read within this idea of hyperstition, which is a prophecy that makes itself true, or a story that doesn't exist but makes itself true. Profezia che si autoavvera, as we say in Italian, you know. So, I mean, I think these images should read within that kind of conceptual framework rather than the fake versus real.
Interesting how we keep moving, always missing it, just one little bit at a time. Whatever we come up with a solution, then they move to the next thing. The next question?
Yeah, first of all, thank you both for insightful presentations, really interesting. I have a very simple question to both of you. Do you see, as you mentioned, that these technologies or companies are mostly not used, or not that we know, by the other part of the political spectrum, probably? And so do you see any ethical way of counter-reacting these shadowy operations? So is there a way how we could actually, I mean, we or the people who are not in the far-right domain somehow employ these technologies and somehow work with it, or should they play dirty as well? What's your view on the moral issue, maybe also?
Both for the use of these kinds of tricks, but also for using generative AI to come up with a new future, or an idea of a future that appeals to a different audience.
First of all, I do not personally believe in technological fixes, so I don't think the problem lies in technology, even though AI in general, especially generative AI, is problematic for the ways in which it actually extracts resources from people and from our planet, you know, and also the categories that it uses. So I think it's an inherently problematic technology. But then my question, I think the focus, as it was said also before, is the question of the future. What is the imagination of the future that we want to offer? That's the key to counteract this propaganda, because if we don't have an imagination of the future, we cannot offer anything positive to people, so they won't buy on it. I mean, these images have a future to offer. Come join the Third Temple movement and you will see the temple in Jerusalem, and we will go back to that golden age, which is, of course, a structural nostalgia of the past. It's like Make America Great Again, you know? So it's something that never was, however, it's reimagined and re-rendered through the most cutting-edge technology. But I think that the answer lies in something rather than technology, which is building a vision of the future that is convincing and compelling and can lure people in. Otherwise, there's no technological fix possible.
And I think actually I'm going to give a very similar answer, but like with a different framing, because I think for me I also worked with campaigning and thought about how do we do this right. And one of the questions often asked was like, how do we do it as good as the bad guys are doing it? Like, how do we win like they are? And I think like that's also thinking about winning, and it's not thinking about like what they're doing. And what they're doing is disrupting trust, and that's possible. Like that's what they do, and it can be quite quickly done. And building trust requires a different set of things. But that doesn't mean we don't use the technology. It's just you have to start with like, what are we trying to achieve? And it's not necessarily winning votes. It's like winning trust. It's building community. It's a lot of different things. And then you look at the tools you've got and think, how do we do that with the tools we've got? And so I would put the tools second to the vision.
Tools, yes. I mean, you see there's big protests in the United States today that are saying no kings, and it's like, there's a positive vision for the future. We already have that future. We already have no kings. Like, what are you asking for, you know? You're talking about what you don't want. Did we have any questions from online?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Okay, I have one question for Donatella, because both in your performance and now also on the panel, you repeatedly use the term of speculative, speculative violence. And my question is, it's a little bit a philological question, are you explicitly or implicitly referring to speculative design and to Dunn and Raby? Because it seems like what you presented is just an execution of their playbook of design fiction and even creating fictitious countries. And this is a textbook. I come from an art school that's mostly a design school. All our students have to do this. All the design schools teach this. So I wonder whether this plays a role, and whether we could say it's the weaponization of Dunn and Raby speculative design that is happening here.
Thank you for the question. No, my background is in media studies, so of course I'm thinking more about, the Warwick idea of hypersession rather than thinking about speculative design. This idea that I'm working on, speculative violence, is an elaboration. Like, of course, by no means I do not want to focus exclusively on the speculation part, because we do know that violence is going on the ground, right? So this is a kind of violence that goes hand in hand with the material violence. But I think what I'm trying to describe here is a mechanism that is specific also to the technology that is used to visually render it. For example, I'm also writing now in an upcoming essay about plausibility, because this idea is also connected to words that are plausible. So, for example, Roland Meyer writes a lot about plausibility as a statistical instance within generative AI, but also at the same time a socio-cultural element, And of course, in the case of Israel-Palestine, of course it's plausible. I mean, look at the world today. I mean, I do believe that a third temple can likely happen. The Gaza Riviera, for sure, it's already happening. We are not seeing it, but they are flattening the land in Gaza to prepare these kind of things. And by the way, one of the visuals I used in the performance, it's called Come Visit Gaza, and it's an ad which was made by the official Hasbara in Israel, so the official PR propaganda, back in January 2024. And it was distributed over streaming platforms, mainstream streaming platforms such as Hulu, which means that Trump Riviera, which was published and distributed in February 2025, was long before thought about and packaged into these AI visuals by Netanyahu himself. So this idea has been circulating also the Gaza 2035, which was distributed by the Prime Minister office in May 24. So, I mean, we are talking about more than 1 year of showing these visuals around and talking about relocating or ethnic cleansing of the Gaza population. So again, we're talking about plausibility, which is not only a feature of the generative AI, but it's also a socio-technical element, which I see at work in the geopolitics of Israel and Palestine.
So did we have a question from the online audience? Oh,
we
great.
actually have two questions.
Do we have time for two?
One, Do we have time for two? Only one.
Maybe you can combine.
Okay,
and we'll
so
get
Donatella, you already answered the question, so this one is for you, Tina. As editor-in-chief of Unbiased the News, how do you protect journalistic integrity in an environment increasingly shaped by AI-generated content?
Thanks for the question for me. I'm not one of the panelists, but I'm happy to just say we are not using AI for images on my website, which has a lot of images on it, and it's already a very uphill battle because you're seeing illustrators being put out of a job very rapidly. But in terms of preventing from LLM-generated content from getting into the news, this is really tricky, and I'm not sure actually how other newsrooms are planning to do it. There are sometimes I think you can tell by the tone of the content because there's a certain cadence to AI-generated content, like, here's the tea, girlfriend, what's gonna, it's very slang inflected and always says, it's not this, think this. But other than these kind of markers that you can catch, I do think it's gonna be very difficult, except that I think that to some degree there's a deadness and a lack of context and personality. And one of the things that makes our newsroom cool is that we work with journalists from all over the world. So we have different kinds of Englishes represented. And that is something that I think AI is very bad at capturing. The way that, for example, Germans speaking English in Germany use the present tense a lot more. The way people from different countries have more, flowery language, or drop a bunch of these there, so you know that they're from Eastern Europe or something. Maybe AI can eventually get there where they can do it, but I think what they're training on is some kind of standard American English, and so I think, as usual, the answer is to diversify and collaborate.
Thank you.
Well, if that's it, thank you for giving me a chance to say something. I think that was about my newsroom. It's really nice, but I want to thank our panelists because this was the interesting topic today. Especially want to give a special thanks to Míriam Juan-Torres, despite not being able to join us for the panel, for giving that really interesting and insightful input into the work that she's working on. Thank you very much to Donatella Della Ratta and to Amber Macintyre for your guys' presentations. These were super interesting and a great way to end the conversation for this conference. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you very much also from my side. It was a very important panel, also a great way to conclude this conference. I just want to give the closing words and actually mention that the conference is not finished, because tomorrow we have a workshop that will happen at Stadtwerkstatt. So not here at the Studio One, but in Stadtwerkstatt, that is the same venue of NGBK, so close to Alexanderplatz, and we will have a workshop on defending civic space, countering disinformation with case studies from Georgia, Hungary, Russia, and Turkey, run by Maya Talatakse, that I'm very happy that she's also here in Berlin with us, because we have been cooperating with her for many years, actually, doing a project about disinformation, gender violence, and cooperating strictly with their organization. So thank you, Maya. And tomorrow, the workshop will start at 1 and will go until 4. And then also I remind that there is the other events with Donatella next, like also tomorrow at 6, that I already mentioned before, at Tatwerk, if you want to go more in depth on her topics. And as usual, when we conclude the conference, I want to mention the next one. So we will have another conference with the title Techno-Violence, between the 19th and 21st of September. We'll be again here at Studio One in this venue. And in a sense, this idea of techno-violence that has nothing to do with the techno music is about exactly what we also mentioned today, the idea that we are witnessing a moment of in which people are producing evidence of systematic oppression through direct experience. So the idea will be to invite people in which that are also oppressed by all this system, by the violence that we experience every day. And then they are the witness as well, that they can speak about what is happening in terms of, for example, of human rights abuse in war conflicts and border regimes, or the idea of cyber surveillance that is part of extractive industry, as we also saw today in part. And of course, we will speak also about police violence. We will have a workshop about that, the 16th of October, and GBK. So the idea would be to really speak about who is also harmed by all this situation that we discussed today through their own situated experience. So I also want to say, if you want to know about the next program of the Disruption Network Lab, we have a Telegram channel, and also from our follow page of our website, you can find very different ways to follow us. And the very important one is also to become a member of the Disruption Network Lab. You would pay €50, and with that you enter for free to all our events. And this is for us very important, because also is a way that helps us to go on with our activity. So the members are always very welcome, and you can also register directly online. And finally, I want to conclude by really thanking from the depth of my heart the team of the Disruption Network Lab. So I want to mention all of them one by one, and then we all go to have dinner and have fun. But I think they also deserve their moment. So first I want to thank Jonas Franke, that is the creative producer of the Disruption Network Lab. Then Lucas Hoffman, the project manager of the Disruption Network Lab. And also special thanks to Max Griguch, that was the project manager of the Disruption Network Lab, and he came for these days of the conference also to support us again. And the team of the digital communication from Agnese Trocchi, Janine Romer, and Christine Serafin. Björk Roy, that works on the administration and finance. The Boiling Head Media and Radha Adhikari, that has been with his team doing all the streaming for these days. Maria Silvano for the photography. Paolo Combes for the sounds. Francesco Mancori and Torsten Oken for the technology support. And then also all the helpers and the cash desk and all the people that supported in build up this situation at the Studio One. And of course, a big thank to the speakers and the public that stay until now for the Shadows of Illiberalism conference. Thank you.